Welcome to the Greenroom, a new podcast series by Sustainable Buildings Canada designed to help the building industry stay informed about the latest trends and techniques for building more sustainable buildings. I'm Jeff Fredericks, and I'm joined by Kit Milnes, Vice President, Sustainability and Resilience at Kingsett Capital, Scott Armstrong, Senior Facade Specialist, Building Sciences at WSP, and Carly Connor, Senior Associate at Walter P. Moore. We're thrilled to be hosting another episode of the Greenroom podcast. Today's episode will focus on best practices and key considerations when deep retrofitting a heritage building. We'll zero in on the high-profile work Kingsett Capital has underway with the Royal York Hotel in Toronto and discuss ways their approach and insights can be applied to other heritage projects and building types, including multi-residential. So, let's get on with the show. Okay, Kit, let's start with you. How about an introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm the Vice President of Sustainability and Resilience at Kingsett Capital. What that essentially means and what most of my day-to-day work is focused on is convincing people, or trying to convince people who are a lot smarter than me and a lot wealthier than me, to allow me to create value in ways that they've never had value created before. Sustainability is one of these things that for the last 20 years has been a catch-all for kind of anything new that's come on the market where it doesn't fit in the traditional kind of silos of commercial real estate. And what that opportunity gives me is when things like decarbonization, energy efficiency comes along, they come with capital requirements, but I need to tell the story to investors and landlords and owners that this investment's worthwhile because it has a payout. And if I can do that effectively, then we can get situations like the Royal York where we have a big capital price tag, but the achievements we get out of it are bigger than what we ever thought would be possible, and it makes sense environmentally, socially, and economically. And my job is to align all three of those presented in a way that investors feel comfortable with and are willing to take that risk and that leap with me.
Awesome. Sounds like a pretty interesting job. Scott, how about you? Introduction, please.
Yeah, I'm Scott Armstrong with WSP in our building sciences team. I am a building science specialist and a sustainability generalist. I've been in the business for about 25 years. My role is primarily on the technical aspect of building enclosures, and more recently been working with a lot of clients on helping them understand their place in the decarbonization journey, bringing the right teams together to help move that journey along, and bring people together to drive for change. It sounds a little ambiguous, but really it's about that journey. It's about enabling the journey. It's about understanding where you are and bringing the right people to it. Yeah.
Awesome. Carly.
Hi. I'm Carly Connor. I'm the Toronto manager of the diagnostics team at Walter P. Moore. Until recently, I worked with Scott, but I'm a heritage specialist and an engineer that loves masonry buildings and old buildings especially. I'm on the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals board, and really into our work on advocacy with our really great committee of sort of heritage professionals across Canada, diving into adaptive reuse and the challenges around our older building stock and wanting to make sure we kind of address the new era and can help bring them into the future.
Terrific. Great. Well, then it makes sense that we would ask you then to help us define, if you could, the whole idea of a heritage building, and then further what some of the unique characteristics of the building are that make it challenging when it comes to retrofitting.
So in the context of like heritage, we just have old buildings, and they're built the same as the heritage listing, but when it becomes heritage, it means someone has deemed that it has significant value. That could be because of its archaeological value, its social value, its artistic value, or its architectural and construction practices and how it got put together. But it has a designation attached. And oftentimes, the challenges we have with retrofitting for old buildings are huge. We're looking at, we can't necessarily just apply our modern ways of retrofitting and increasing sort of insulation and R value, and our M&E systems can be more complicated to replace. But as soon as you have a historical designation, it means that you can't generally, depending on the designation, change the look of the building, which sort of eliminates your options to add insulation on the exterior. Sometimes you're locked in to not make changes on the interior. You're looking at having to be really creative with your sort of M&E renewal choices that you can't see those changes happen. You can't necessarily see new equipment on the roof. You can't sort of see new ductwork that needs to be run through the building. You just have to get more inventive, and a lot of people look at sort of the modern ways of what we think is an energy efficient building, and then they look at their old heritage building and say, I don't even know where to start, and it gets stuck because it seems like such a sort of insurmountable challenge, which is what we really need to help solve, because it isn't sort of that as big of a challenge as some people might think, as long as we're more flexible of wanting to maintain that those buildings do have use moving forward.
Every building, when you're looking at big projects like this, is like a puzzle. I think heritage buildings just happen to be, you know, that 5,000 piece puzzle. So it takes longer, but they're doable, and you just need patience and really good teams to kind of help put all of the pieces in the right places.
Well, then let's pick up on that, Kit. And, you know, one of the projects, of course, we wanted to talk about today is the project that your firm has undertaken in the deep retrofit of the Royal York Hotel, one of the most beloved sort of iconic buildings we have in Toronto. One of the big challenges, as you've shared with us already, is that it's also a fully occupied hotel, and you've got paying guests, and so that presents its own challenges. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the project itself and where you're at with it, if you could?
Sure. I mean, the project's just about complete now. We've got all the heat pumps commissioned. They're on. We're connected to the deep lake water cooling. All the steam has been turned off and really just exists now as a redundant backup system. But that's today. It took a lot of teams, and it took about 3 years of actually executing to get to where we are today. And even before then, a ton of work had been done on the hotel, redoing the lobby, updating the restaurants, updating all the rooms as well. And that was done, you know, I think like 2015, 2016 to 2018. And one thing we didn't have was any data points on how the systems run. And if you walk in the back of house of the Royal York, back then you could see, you know, opportunity bound. But where do you start? There's all of this legacy equipment. At certain parts, there's, you know, 5 feet of old piping and wiring that isn't used. So, you know, new groups would just come in and put new stuff and not remove all the old. So we ended up partnering with a company called Circuit Meter to first put sub-metering all over the place. Get every single piece of equipment, understand how it's running, and what it's consuming. So where's all of our power going? Once we figured that out, we had all of these great recommendations, but the systems were so old we couldn't really do anything with it. There was no centralized building automation system to be able to adjust schedules, you know, change how dampers were open and closed, turn down drives. That stuff wasn't there. So that was the beginning part of the journey of figuring out what opportunities do we actually have, and then progressing through the next about 4 years of doing a study, putting teams together, applying for Canadian Infrastructure Bank financing, because the capital that was required to do all of this was so big that we needed help with it. All of that took us to kind of today where, you know, we're zero carbon building certified. I think it's the largest hotel in Canada, maybe North America, one of the largest in the world that has a zero carbon building designation. And it's got to be one of the largest hotel deep carbon retrofit projects in the world. I mean, it's over 1,300 rooms, it's over 1.3 million square feet, and it's a heritage building. So there's a lot of stuff you couldn't touch. But what we were able to do was significant, and really the crazy story that we're talking about with, you know, 80% reduction in carbon. that's something.
Huge achievement. And I want to get back into some of the details of the work itself. Bring Scott in on this now. Scott, you and your firm have done some work on some pretty significant heritage buildings as well. The work you're doing in Ottawa with the Parliament buildings at Centre Block. Is there anything about what Kit just described that you can relate to in tackling these type of significant buildings?
Yeah, just listening to Kit talk about the Royal York Hotel, I have a personal connection there because I did restoration work there in 2007 and 8 probably. We came up with the master restoration program for the exterior facade to stabilize the...
As a contractor.
Okay, yeah, nice. There you go. So we've got both have a personal connection there. And so there's that whole aspect of like maintaining this building, right? So that it could be retrofitted, and recognizing that there are deterioration mechanisms that are occurring and we need to sort of address those while the decarb could happen, so that the decarb could happen, right? Now, I think heritage buildings specifically, there are a number of other key things. The challenge obviously is moisture, durability. We want to make sure that whatever we do for this retrofit doesn't accelerate the deterioration that we're trying to deal with on the exterior enclosure. And also I think the challenge really is trying to figure out what the big win is. So I know at Royal York Hotel, there wasn't anything on the enclosure that was done because the rooms are upgraded. It's a heritage building, so you can't really do anything on the outside. The windows are not super old, but they're probably getting close to a life cycle replacement phase. So is there a big opportunity on the enclosure? And I think windows is probably the next big opportunity. You can do that in a very heritage sensitive way. Other heritage buildings, as you mentioned, Centre Block, it's building science fundamentals, right? It's heat flow, it's moisture, it's liquid water control, vapor flow. I think the biggest opportunity we probably have is around air leakage, and then prioritizing thermal performance and where the big wins are. So it's like, an old stone wall is not terrible from a thermal perspective. Like it's certainly not as terrible as some of modern condominium window wall products. And so do you have to insulate the stone? Maybe not.
Yeah,
maybe you just
exactly.
Maybe you just do air tightness and you replace the windows, right? So it's recognizing like what is the opportunity, right? What's the enabler, right? Because the enclosure is the enabler of a low carbon heating and cooling system.
And I guess, one of the things we're doing here is we're taking that learning and we're looking at how we can share it and apply it to all sorts of different things. So we'll get into maybe talking a little bit about the fact that this was an occupied building and the challenges that it presents. But also context, do we know how many heritage buildings exist in this country? And or even just like ballpark.
I want to say this is
right?
someone's gonna write back that it's wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's 35,000. But it's not even there's designated buildings, right. But then it's really that here's our old building stock. There's really nothing different between calling it heritage and it just being old in how it's built, how you need to upgrade it. As long as it's still standing and you still want it to be here, it's just that there's different maintenance requirements of an owner that owns a heritage building that that building needs to stay, and we might use better sort of planning for it to stay. Right. But I think to Scott's point, it's saying here's this building stock of helping inform people of really where the best bang for their buck is. When it seems sort of insurmountable, and to say, here's all the things I need to do. I can't do these 3 things that I know how to do, but are they the right 3 things that actually got you the payback? To say, how does your M&E system work? Where is the air going? Is, a chimney sucking out the air up top, and it's really not about the performance of the wall itself. It's, the ceiling around the windows, or it's looking at a real study to saying, where's the impact of where's the air going? How can I improve the function and cost of how I run this building from an M&E perspective, and do those upgrades sensitively, and get that return on investment that we might not have, the perfect sort of passive house level of building, but if we get 80% of the way there, that's an 80% improvement over what you had when you might have started the project saying, oh, we can't get to 100%. Maybe I just want to tear this down and start new where I get to 100% because that's what I know to do in this sort of energy context. But it's making it easier to know where to look or the right study of where to put your resources to get you that return that starts the financial conversation to actually make the projects happen.
Yeah, I'm curious about, I mean, maybe we're getting a bit off topic, but I'm curious about some of the constraints on the mechanical and electrical side, specifically around electrical service capacity. Like these to me are the kind of technical challenges with all building retrofits, but I'm curious about in the heritage context, getting enough power in a building to electrify it and get off steam. That's not a small thing.
So let's talk about that. Go
Sure.
ahead,
And I'll address that kind of because it's something that we were very concerned about, especially the high cost of bringing in additional electrical feeds and the additional taxing on the grid, and the time and the just like trying to be a good corporate citizen while decarbonizing. If you're sucking up all of the available electricity to do so, are you being that good of a corporate citizen? So for the Royal York specifically, we didn't need to bring in an additional electrical feed. Right. We didn't need to build more capacity. Now, we brought one in because it was a lot faster and easier to, in the access point of this massive building footprint, to make a new connection from one side of the building to another versus running a line all the way through. So the net is we're not actually utilizing any more electricity. In fact, we've modeled it out. We're expecting to have our peaks drop down on our electrical demand and our overall consumption, considering the fuel switching from steam to electricity, to be still at or below our peaks that we were seeing in 2018, 2019 when we were hitting the last kind of baseline year that exists for buildings in general right now.
Pre-COVID.
Yes, and so on the electrical side, we see the exact same thing with our other retrofits our other buildings that we're decarbonizing. We're freeing up so much capacity by driving efficiency, which is the first and foremost piece that you need to look at when you're going to do a deep carbon retrofit. Is you want to reduce as much as you can, so that when you're looking at the fuel switch and a whole new mechanical system, you can right size it, lower the capital requirements of that system, and then the financials play out a lot better, and you're utilizing less electricity over time. So the capacity that these buildings, right now we've looked at late 70s, early 80s time frame where these buildings have been built. We're not bringing in any new electrical feeds for them either. So if you approach it right and you do go all the way instead of, I'm just going to do this piece right now and then in 5 years I'll put in some heat pumps. That I think you lose the ability to capture those really deep savings and then avoid some of these really big higher costs. And we were pretty surprised to see it play out in a heritage building like Royal York, in the same way that we did in our kind of office buildings that we've been decarbonizing as well.
Interesting. And I'm curious too whether or not you got any learning from other places around the world that have dealt with heritage buildings before you went and did this work, because obviously we're not the only country with heritage buildings.
I don't think so. I mean, so the individual teams and the groups that we had involved may have been bringing some learnings that they had from past projects or parent companies. But we didn't really look at Europe or anywhere else for, has someone done this? What did they do? How did they do it? One of the main reasons was Toronto has a very unique district energy system that very few locations globally have. That's the N-Wave deep lake water cooling, where we're pulling in very steady, consistent cold water from the bottom of Lake Ontario. It's running up through these massive pipes, and buildings that connect into the system can utilize that for cooling. And then in the winter, if they need to dump heat into it because they've gotten rid of their cooling tower, they can dump heat into it as well. and we were getting off their other district energy system, the steam. So when you're looking at those two, the existing system with, you know, half of what the proposed system was, we really weren't going to be able to find comparables around the world to say that's how they did it, so let's do it here.
Gotcha.
We had really good teams in Toronto that had been looking at this type of approach for large building deep carbon retrofits. And we had those teams on to help with the Royal York. So we felt like we were getting the best guidance with really good teams that were working with systems in our market that we were trying to utilize.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Wow. Some impressive learning there, of course, that can be applied across the board. I know one of the things we did want to talk a little bit about is the fact that it's an occupied building and the challenges that come with trying to do this work. Well, you've got paying hotel guests that are quick to hit the Google review if they didn't have a good night's sleep. So tell me a little bit about that challenge, because of course you've got to get this work done while you got a hotel that's trying to operate. And where we think there's some good learning is, what about a multi-res building, for example, that wants to undertake something like this and again has occupants?
So I think, and there are others who are further ahead than Kingsett on decarbonizing multi-res. I think that might be more difficult because you're going into people's homes. It's not just a space that you're in for a night or a weekend or, you know, a week. As terrible as that is, and you know, you give someone a bad experience, the damage that you could create for the brand is very high, much higher than in a multi-res situation. But when you're talking about people's homes, there's a whole other aspect that you have to grapple with, and there's all of their things that you might have to move. You might have to relocate them. You might have to move them out. So for that, I think it might be more difficult. With a fully occupied hotel coming out of COVID, because we started all of this at the end of 2021 was when we presented to our CEO, John Love, and he was very enthusiastic. He wanted this day one in January. And so as Canada, and especially Toronto, was coming out of big lockdowns, we were saying, okay, now we're going to go and disrupt all of your systems. We've been told we need 19 power shutdowns. We were able to draw that back to 5, trying to time them overnight so you have, you know, dozens of people working in the back of house, communicating and working with the front of house Fairmont staff, facility managers. We've got the city helping, you know, going through reviews. We've got temporary generators outside to manage when we shut down the power of the building. These generators kick on so operations can still keep going. And then because all of the equipment was legacy, over the last 6-7 decades, things had been tied into things that shouldn't have been tied into. So when you flip a breaker, you don't really know what you're going to shut off. Which makes it really difficult, one, to do work, but two, to also, you know, keep your impact isolated from all the occupants and the restaurants and everything like that. And then that's just the electrical side. On the water side, there's even less systems to check and control for a shutoff. So we had to bring in a lot of liquid nitroglycerin to freeze the lines, because we have no shutoff valves. So we could then shut off the main valves, and then, you know, maybe you don't, maybe you spring a leak, maybe you don't, maybe there's some damage that you weren't anticipating, because these pipes and this infrastructure is so old that, you know, you can look at it and think this will handle it. It's been handling all of this water this whole time. But when you create a shutdown, you're upping the pressure by so much that something could very easily give. So there's, you know, some of the teams had 24, 48-hour shifts of working through power outages, things that happened that weren't anticipated, that we now need to grapple very quickly, because, yeah, the hotel stayed operational the entire time we executed all of this. And we started the work and finished the work in 2 years after doing all the study and planning and designing, and making sure, like, this is what we think, this is where we need to focus, and this is the timing of all of that focus.
Well, an incredible triumph on that front for sure, to be able
Thank
to
you.
accomplish that.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that we also know is a big challenge when it comes to this kind of work is the financing piece. And you mentioned on the top end about the investment in the financing that was made possible for this. Wanted to bring you guys into the conversation around financing, and maybe Carly talk a little bit about your experience having that conversation and how it typically goes when it comes to getting something like this off the ground.
What we've seen is like the money has to work. That we can say, here's these processes, we figured out the technology, we know what to do, we know where to look first. But if you don't have the finances line up to convince the people that aren't in the project that this is, the right approach, then it all just kind of dies and sits there. Or it seems like such an insurmountable price tag that it's like, oh, well, we can't ever afford this, or it doesn't make sense. And what we've really looked at, especially lately through CAP, is sort of, here are all these buildings and that have different types of ownership and different finances available to them, but trying to collectively work with everyone that is doing the work to outline, how did it happen? Like, here's the finances, here's the different funds, here's the different programming depending on what you're trying to do, and make it as accessible to people as possible. To kind of take out all the guesswork that every person is doing, all of the different research as to where, this grant, this type of funding, how do I apply it? Is it actually being put in the right way? Is it kind of taking it out of its individual silos and kind of saying, here's the different options depending on what type of building you have, what your timelines are, what type of project you're taking on. Here are the different approaches that you can do to make these projects viable. And also in that, we're hoping to really highlight where the gaps are. To say, when it goes from, managing a portfolio where you might have different financing and payback metrics that you can be rewarded for, down to, just a regular one building owner that's looking at kind of all of this maintenance and how do I upgrade this building? What are my choices? How do I make, the right choices now when I'm needing all of this maintenance, but I don't know how to get the capital I would need for any large change, down to, just the regular owner of like a heritage home that says, I kind of have this energy efficient dinosaur maybe, does it have life left? And trying to help them make better informed decisions and sort of channel the funding that's coming from different government levels in the right spots and make it as easy to understand as possible. So that, there's lots of great programs out there, but it's getting that first step when people are considering an idea or renewing a building or buying a building, of knowing what it can do and what options are available to them, is what we have sort of identified as a real challenge of like starting the right conversations going, because the money has to line up. Otherwise, kind of everything we're doing, will die sort of on the table at some point.
Sustainability can't be unsustainable.
Yeah.
Like, and if you can't justify the cost, like, I love that Kingsett is so, forward focused on finance and economics, making that line up, because it forces you to create and execute on projects that are sustainable and make financial sense. Because if you didn't, then honestly, I think you're doing a disservice to the entire movement of trying to get people into this space and taking deeper looks. Because if the money doesn't line up and you're just throwing it out the window, then no one else will want to repeat that. And everyone will point to that as like, this isn't fiscally prudent. This isn't you didn't do it right. If at the end of the day, at the end of this equipment's life, you're out of pocket some great sum.
Yeah.
Right.
I think just touching on the finance piece, and then I want to come back a bit to the occupied building question, because I think there's a lot to talk about there. I like Kit's example of understanding all of the systems and what all needs to change, and because I think only in that context can you really find the financial path, right? Yeah. And when it's an isolated component or an isolated system, those are often, so in some cases they're super easy to justify because they have extremely quick paybacks, or what have you. And other projects have very long paybacks, like enclosure retrofits. They don't pay for themselves, but they are enabling technologies. So we took, in a lot of our existing building retrofit work, this is that one last week, we're we're doing a full enclosure retrofit as an enabler to a low carbon mechanical and electrical system in the multi-unit residential building. And I've been in a number of conversations with clients about wanting to do decarbonization, but struggling with capacity, electrical capacity to the site, and trying to make an enclosure retrofit make sense financially as an enabling technology for decarbonization in the context of grid stewardship, being a good corporate citizen, not wanting to take all the power for yourself, right? There's all these things that kind of go together that, and all of that creates potentially the financial path for it to make sense. So anyways, on the financing side, that I think looking at everything together is really the only way you're going to find the financial path to make the deepest of retrofits, right? And I think that's what you're finding there.
Yeah, and do you find, and I know you had a great partnership, I guess, with Infrastructure Bank to get that underway. That partnership's, I guess, obviously critical too to help with the actual financing piece, right? The lending.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at this project came up to about 65 million at the end of the day. The Canadian Infrastructure Bank has provided the upfront financing for 46 million of that.
Okay.
If we had to go to investors and say, guys, you just spent a lot of money on upgrading all the lobbies and the rooms for the hotel's 90th, and we're just coming out of COVID where you guys were under severe financial pressure, we would now like $65 million to do some deep carbon retrofit work. It's a non-starter. Yeah. Especially coming out of the last 3 years in the lockdowns. So the role that CIB played was massive, and it helped us kind of refine that story of what money's coming in, what are we asking for, where's it going, and what's the output. So it was very helpful on that front, and it really helps us to move as quickly as we did, or maybe to go as deep as we did. And it's been so successful. We've got another submission in with them for our core fund, our long-term hold, to help us decarbonize. I think it's 6 or 7, large office properties in that fund as well, because office, an asset class that will remain under pressure for a number of years financially. So you only have a window to do these really deep carbon retrofits once every 20 years. You're trying to line the mechanical systems up as closely as you can to end of life, so that you're not talking about, let's use, for example, a $10 million decarb project. You're talking about, well, you'd be spending $7 million anyway because you need new systems. And to decarbonize, it's only actually a $3 million premium. And then you're looking at, how do you justify that $3 million premium to all the additional savings you're going to get on carbon emissions, on op costs, on creating a more resilient asset, a more desirable asset. Brown discount, green premium, I kind of put all that aside. We don't model any premium on rent or asset valuation increases. What we're looking at is purely, have we created an asset that is more resilient, less exposed to global commodities like natural gas, where we have zero control, and is going to have a significant impact in its carbon emissions, because City of Toronto has a target of 2040 where everything has to be net zero operationally. The carbon tax, whether you believe it's going to stay or go, we model with and without. These projects make sense with or without. So we're not hinging all of our financial payback just on a carbon pricing scheme.
Right.
The resilience comment is very telling or prescient in the multi-res sector, especially in the context of Carly's comment that it's either an old building or a heritage building. It's the same building. It's of a certain age. Most of them don't have air conditioning, and most of them are becoming increasingly uninhabitable, especially in the summer in Toronto and elsewhere in Canada. And all of our decarb projects have that added benefit of providing cooling, right? And so you're getting a low carb mechanical and electrical system, heating and cooling. So you're adding resilience, you're adding comfort. You know, I think there's a social equity piece, you know, in multi-unit residential buildings, especially in the affordable sector.
And Scott, you wanted to unpack the fact that the occupant building concept a little bit more, because, as you say, it does present a whole host of challenges. I mean, what can we learn from the work that Kit and Kingsett did at the hotel that could be applied to multi-resident?
What I hear first is understand the problem, right? And understand what's there that doesn't need to be there, and what can you get rid of safely without any effect, right? In the work that we've done, there are two different problems. The enclosure, I think, is a lot easier because we've done that work from the exterior on buildings for decades, right? And we're currently doing it, overcladding, or in one building I was at last week, stripping all the brick off, air sealing it, insulating on the outside, and recladding it, right? So we're getting a different looking building. And the only reason we're taking the brick off is because it was unstable. So we're addressing this massive capital need and taking that as an opportunity to upgrade.
Yeah.
What we're now diving into is the design on the M&E system, mechanical and electrical systems within that multi-unit residential building. And that's actually, that's harder because you're going into people's homes, right? You're coring through slabs, or you're building bulkheads, or you're taking old systems out and putting something else in, potentially in a different spot. You're maybe going through the wall, or putting something on their balcony, or like there are all these other, like going from a commercial office, I think is a bit more straightforward. You've got centralized systems, right? You can replace a giant piece of equipment with another giant piece of equipment and all of a sudden be low carbon.
Yeah.
But in a multi-unit residential building, it's all distributed systems, right? And you're switching probably from corridor pressurization, fresh air, to in-suite ERVs and direct ventilation in suites. Yeah. I mean, that kind of change from central to, or call it corridor central to distributed, it's a massive disruption. Yeah. And
then you've got like the envelope perforations for your stove exhaust, yes, your dryer. Yeah. Those all are leaks that if you're looking at a major retrofit, if you want to seal those up and put in recirculating hoods or recirculating dryers, then you have a humidity issue that you need to tackle. Like, they just keep getting the problems don't go away, they just change as you try to drive to like a near passive house multi-res project.
So what we're looking at is trying to figure out the timing of the projects, and can you start to incorporate some of the mechanical and electrical retrofit systems within the cladding retrofit, right? So are there enabling things? Can you build a chase in your new cladding so that you can run your piping through that to punch through the wall, so you don't have to core through the suites, or you don't have to take headroom in the hallway? All of these things, and that can really only be done when everything's being considered at the same time. Yeah.
Well, and I guess it's a big ask too for the resident to live through this in a time where many residents are pressured with rising rents. Yeah. They're feeling the pinch there, and then suddenly a notice comes in indicating that there's going to be 2 years worth of disruption while all these systems get upgraded.
And they're at home.
And they're at home. Where are they
so
going to go?
More.
And they are, because of course there's still less flexible work schedule. So the question, I guess, is as much as we know this work needs to be done, it should be done, you've got a communication challenge at the same time, right? You've got an operational challenge. You've got to convince these residents that there's going to be some disruption, how we're going to live through it, how we're going to schedule it so it doesn't, maybe it rolls out. So these are big questions, aren't they? And at the same time, you're depending on that cash flow from these residents, so you need them to stay. So I guess this is one of the things that we really need to tackle is how do you line all these things up? And I don't know, are there some multi-res projects that we can point to say, yeah, that's how you do it? That might be different than the hotel?
I think a lot of groups are doing a lot of interesting work. I know Minto's doing a lot. I know there are groups in Quebec. We've looked at hiring one of the consultants out of Quebec to help us tackle the multi-res space, but it's all different flavors and shapes and sizes. So one of the least disruptive approaches, and if you have a semi-centralized system in a multi-res building, is just doing things on suite turnover. So you're not actually going in, disrupting someone's home, moving their stuff, or moving them out. If you don't have to touch the facade, it's a lot less intrusive on their space. And typically, if you're not going into their space, aside from some coring, which can be really loud, hopefully you can get around a lot of the kind of noise complaints and that type of disruption. But I don't think there's going to be a type of one size fits all. I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet. I think some projects are just going to be messy inherently because of the way the building was designed, built, and then operated throughout the last 20, 30 years. I mean, we've seen office buildings that are right next door to each other, built at the same time, almost the same size. But over the years, as they've gone in and out of different ownership, have had different operators and managers, the cost to decarbonize changes significantly. Maybe one moved their mechanical space from the basement to the penthouse and one didn't. Maybe the side that the electrical feed's coming into is different from one than the other. And all of this stuff kind of adds up and up and up to the point where like one could be double the cost to decarbonize as the other. So even in the office space, you do see this kind of snowflake syndrome, right? Every building's a snowflake. I like to say, at the micro level, light bulb is a light bulb. Doesn't matter where in the world you're going to plug it in. That light bulb is going to operate the way that light bulb was designed to. Same with a pump or a fan or a drive. But when you start zooming out and you look at the macro of an entire building, all of these other things start mattering, like I just mentioned. And then, is the building really old? Do you have asbestos in it? Oh, well, there's a couple $100,000 to maybe $1 million on abating that. Do you have mold from a leak that happened 15 years ago? Well, now you have to address that. So it really does become, the theories at a high level are kind of ubiquitous. Like you gotta drive efficiency, you gotta electrify, fuel switch, automate. But then once you get to the building specifically, everything needs to be kind of more custom than you would expect or want.
Yeah, and I think it's worth recognizing that we don't have an industry to do this right now.
No.
Right? So we're pursuing these deep retrofit projects of in people's homes, multi-unit residential buildings, full reskinning, entirely new mechanical and electrical system, distribution, everything. And like finding the people with the skills to do that, never mind to understand the problem, study the problem, come up with a solution. Now you need contractors, you need system suppliers, you need residents on board, you need communication. Like that's not something we've done on scale.
And you typically, like a typical building's capital renewal cycles, they do not happen all at once. You got a boiler in, let's say, year 1, you've got your chillers in year 5, maybe the cooling towers in year 7 or year 8. It's nice and spread out. So the capital, you don't see this massive demand for capital and then it just drops off. So that is a whole other complexity that our industry needs to wrap their minds around and figure out, how Kingsett's doing it. Is it the only right way? Definitely not. But we figured out a way that works for us. Right. Just going back to the hotel though, like the initial carbon study, we got pegged all of this at a capital cost of $18 million. And that was 2019 numbers, and you don't know what you don't know until you go in and start doing the work and realize, oh, I can't go this way, or there's asbestos all over here. We need to remove that and remediate that. So as we started moving through, the price kept ticking up and up and up. And, 18 million was probably never a realistic number. COVID and supply chains, that really threw everything for an expensive loop. But where we thought we'd be able to hang piping, once we got in and started testing the structural and wanting to do the work, we couldn't. So we had to do, a multi-million-dollar piping workaround just to have the same effect at the end of the day. We're running pipes like 600-700 feet.
I wonder, it sounds like the challenge a typical homeowner might face when they buy a home. They don't know exactly what they're getting, and then it's unveiled as they start doing the work that they've got bigger problems than they thought. You wonder in the future whether or not, when it comes to acquiring a new building, you're going to bring in a team of experts to do a deep dive before you make the purchase, because you want to make sure, to the best of your ability, right, that you can see that, hey, this is viable, or we can't see enough and we might want to back off on the price.
And we do that now, especially for our long-term hold purchases. We make sure that we have as clear of a line of sight from, only a building condition assessment and a tour of what type of difficulty or hills are we expecting to have to climb up in order to decarbonize this if we want to own it for forever, essentially.
Well, and certainly one of the major advantages that you now have, having done this work, is you can apply that knowledge, apply the team that did the work to these other projects.
And we're trying to share all of that information as well. We have a financial modeling tool that breaks out all the capital input, the operating impacts, the carbon reductions. And that's what we've used for CIB to secure financing. That's what we use with our C-suite and our investors and our boards to get them comfortable that we've modeled this thing to the 9th degree. We've done all of the sensitivity analysis that we think is necessary. We've gone back and forth with them. Hey, do you think we've missed anything? Oh, we have. Let's put that in the model and see how it shakes out. And when we presented that to our partners, like our property managers or investment partners, they were so happy. They were like, can we have our own copy? Like, yeah, of course you can. And then it was, why isn't there anything in the market like this? So we made the decision of we're going to just put this for free on our website. Anyone can download
source it.
Open source it. And, it's not perfect. We're actually going through creating a version 2 of it, and we'll probably put that on the market. It was never our intent to keep updating it. We wanted to just put it out there and let the market do its thing. But we wanted the open market, open source IP to do its thing, where someone could come in and be like, this is great, but you missed this, but you've unlocked this whole file, so I can come in and manipulate this stuff and add this in, and then put something else that's better back into the market. So that was ideally what we were hoping for, or at least just have people use and be like, hey, I couldn't get the buy-in that you guys seem to have, now I can.
That's terrific.
Which I think is key, because we've identified we're in this cool emerging space where everything of what we do is really changing, because it took sort of the first people to do it to show it can be done. Now it's to say all of us are kind of creating from scratch in our little silos, and to say there's the real value of knowing that this needs to be applied to all of our building stock, which seems insurmountable, is to bring all of the knowledge together to actually share, to drive the creation of the industry that then helps, all of the, first adopters to then, be more standardized, make it easier, where it's not just you as a lone sort of capital investor off in this other land with, and taking the risk to say we're proactively doing this, hoping that this becomes the norm and standardized and we're ahead of the curve. But there's so much to be gained of having the conversations to kind of unlock and learn from each other and build that capacity. Because unless we build the capacity, then we can design all of these types of retrofits, but we have to be able to execute them at the end of the day.
Well, that's a great way to wrap this up. Last question for all of you, and we like to ask this at the end of each podcast episode that we do. Why do you think this is a perfect time to be in the space that you guys are in, and your sort of view on the future bit? So, Scott, I might ask you that question. I know.
I was hoping I could go last. So I guess I'll answer in the affirmative that yes, it is, I think, the most exciting time to be in this space. I've been, kind of on the sustainability trajectory for, 15 years. And through that process, this is the time that I've seen the most things kind of coalesce together to push for decarbonization, for sustainability, for, meaningful climate action. And a big part of that is owners now coming to us to ask for help to bring them along that path, as opposed to us trying to convince people that this is something they should do. Right. So that's what makes it exciting for me, is we're no longer feeling like we're having to push that hard. Like everyone is working together in this trajectory. And so that's, to me, what makes it super exciting. And we know we have a huge building stock that is facing a need for major retrofit. And that building stock, and that opportunity is probably going to last for about 10 or 15 years. Like, we've got this huge stock of buildings that need to be done. I think CAGBC, Canada Green Building Council, put out a study, and I think it ended up being 150,000 buildings need to be retrofitted every single day, 365 days a year, for us to meet like a 2050 target. Like that's insurmountable. So there's no shortage of the challenge, but again, like that's super exciting, right?
Challenge is opportunity.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well said. Carly?
I think as like a heritage specialist, for the idea of the outside world for heritage buildings is that, they're locked in time. They're becoming kind of these dinosaurs. And I think the shift, when we're talking about carbon, and really what that means is, up to this point, it's really just been talking about energy. And to say, we can't bring these buildings to be as energy efficient as, the new build, therefore, they don't have as much value moving forward. But we can address the M&E systems. There's, heat pumps are amazing for heritage buildings. You can put them in and have them kind of be out of the way, have them be localized to where you might need the heating and cooling, only turned on when you need them. Like, there's so many opportunities. The heat pumps have provided, heritage buildings already for decades. Like, they're in so many of our heritage buildings before they were the cool new carbon technology. But it's looking at what they represent from an embodied carbon perspective to say, these buildings have already been around for decades or a century or longer. That's like, how many buildings of carbon do they already represent? And how long, because they're built differently, they're meant to last. They have different construction methods that are, maybe expensive to maintain when the maintenance happens, but that maintenance investment carries that life of the building on for so much longer that, these buildings could realistically be here for another 100 years longer, depending on how they're maintained and put together. That completely shifts kind of the conversation, as we might not get perfect on energy with our, those types of buildings, but we're saving so much carbon in the fact that they last. And here's like how they can be renewed. A few of us discussed last week 2 weeks ago at our national conference, a friend of mine on the board called heritage, like the thoughtful management of change. And to say, that we can change. Buildings need to have use, but it's done thoughtfully and in the right way, and not just sort of in a haphazard reaction to, the newfangled idea of what a building should be, which I think is really exciting to say, we're here to have buildings have use, and kind of changing the idea of a sort of museum as a heritage building to, a wide spectrum of buildings that have use because they're meant to, be here long term and be reflective of, the different times of building in our history.
Yeah, terrific. Kit?
I think it's definitely the most exciting time. It's kind of funny to say that, because I've been in sustainability since coming out of university. There was never a degree that you could have gotten to study it, especially in commercial real estate. But it's always been this new industry, this new department for everyone, where it was a lot of like the Wild West shooting from the hip. We're like, is this what it is? I don't know. And then, you know, a couple of years later, something new comes up. It's like, oh, well, I guess it's that too. So let's bring that on. And, you know, it's not just energy efficiency or water efficiency or, you know, waste reduction. It's tenant engagement and social programs and amenities. It's climate change and resilience, and then it's carbon emissions. So it's kind of, if you love change and new challenges, it is 100% the industry for you. And it's so transferable because at the end of the day, a lot of what I work with is data. And the data represents, the different numbers represent different things. That can change if you're in mining or forestry or manufacturing, but at the end of the day, it still comes back to data. And sustainability is all about driving down inefficiencies, cutting waste, and trying to create something that can be sustainable. So today it's carbon. Will it be carbon in 10 years? I think so. Will a couple new pieces come in? Maybe. But I think with just focusing on carbon and the opportunities but difficulties that faces, we're all going to have jobs for the next 30, 40 years, without a doubt. But it's just it's kind of, sustainability has matured to the point where we've got amazing buy-in from senior leadership, from levels of government, from owners, from investors. And that is always going to be the real linchpin on how you can actually execute projects and what projects you can execute. I would argue that Kingsett is able to move so quickly in the last 3-4 years because we've got a leader like John Love who sees the value, sees the opportunity, and we're able to explain what the benefits are to the property, to the portfolio, that there's a value play in this. It's not just doing it because we're being told this needs to be done. It's doing it because we're going to create a more resilient, more valuable, more comfortable, better experienced asset out of it. And that's what institutional investors want. That's what private families who want to invest in long-term real estate want. That's what owners want. That's what operators and property managers, that's where they want to work. They want to work in the buildings that are willing to spend and create a best-in-class experience.
Awesome. That was really well said, guys. You know, one thing that's clear is you're all very passionate about what you're doing, which I think is also a big part of the success, right? You need that passion to also inspire new people to join in the fight, join in the the cause of getting this work underway. There's no doubt it requires talent, and we need to get more people aware of what's possible. And I want to thank you guys for joining us today and sharing your vast knowledge on this important topic.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's show. We hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe for future episodes and check us out on YouTube, our website at spccanada.org, or wherever you get your podcasts.